A glass raised, a room full of laughter, and one sentence sharp enough to break a lifetime of trying. Avery, try not to embarrass us tonight like you always do. That was the moment I understood what silence could do. It wasn't surrender, and it wasn't weakness. It was a blade, clean and final, cutting through years of subtle dismissal and hollow smiles. That night, under glittering fairy lights and the weight of my father's smirk, I walked away from the Harrington family gatherings for good. What followed was not the collapse of my world, but the beginning of building one I could finally call my own. Growing up, a Harrington meant being raised inside a glass case labeled success. My brother Marcus polished his perfectly with Harvard credentials and a surgeon's steady hands. My sister Claire placed hers on a pedestal with law firm promotions and country club parties. Mine, it was always described with a tilt of the head and a smile that never reached the eyes. Avery's creative, they would say, like it was both charming and a flaw. From murals on community center walls to redesign projects I poured my soul into, my work was always brushed aside as quirky or fun. Even when I ran my own design studio by the age of 29, they still introduced me as the dreamer, the one who hadn't quite found her lane. I thought love was earned, so I tried. I arrived early to dinners, offered to decorate for events, poured weeks of effort into gifts that carried pieces of me. The floral arch I built for Claire's engagement party was called Quirky. The watercolor nursery sketch I gave Marcus was dismissed with a laugh and a reminder that they had hired a real decorator. I didn't get angry at first. I simply dulled myself, sanding down the edges of my passion, trying to fit into their frame. But each chuckle, each jab disguised as humor, stacked like brushstrokes on a canvas that eventually suffocated. The holidays were the worst. Thanksgiving meant pies baked from scratch that earned only a smirk and a jab from my father. Christmas meant listening to siblings boast about salaries and houses while I was asked if I was still doing that fun stuff. One Easter, my name card was missing from the table, replaced last minute with a paper scrap and marker ink. Claire laughed, calling it my arts and crafts place. My chair wobbled under me. I laughed along because that's what I had been trained to do, until I couldn't anymore. At their 40th wedding anniversary, I wore a dusky rose dress I had stitched myself. I tried to believe, if only for one night, that things might be different. They weren't. When I stood to give a toast, my father cut me off mid-sentence with a joke about sparing the room my poetry. The laughter that followed felt like glass shattering across my skin. I sat down in silence, cheeks burning, and realized I could spend the rest of my life asking to be seen or I could leave. So I rose again, not with words, but with action. I picked up my clutch, nodded once, and walked straight out under the fairy lights. No one followed. No one stopped me. And for the first time, leaving didn't feel like shame. It felt like revolution. After that night, I didn't announce my departure. I simply stopped showing up. Thanksgiving passed without me. Christmas, too. Birthdays, recitals, galas, they all continued without my presence. At first, the text came, "Are you okay?" Then the sarcasm, "Too busy for family now." Then, eventually, nothing. In the silence they left behind. I began to hear myself again. I moved across the state to a coastal town where no one knew the Harrington name. I rented a loft above a florist's shop, took on small projects, and let mornings unfold quietly with coffee in one hand and pencils in the other. It felt strange, but slowly, it became truth. Then came the email. An architecture studio in Oregon had seen photos of a sunroom I designed and wanted me to lead the spatial concept for a wellness retreat. It was not just a project, it was an opening. I poured myself into it, designing every line and corner with breathability and belonging in mind. When it was finished, Archform magazine ran a feature titled Nature Reimagined. For the first time, my name was in print. Not Marcus, not Claire, not my father. Mine. And I said something I had never said aloud before. I wanted to build spaces where even the quiet ones felt they belonged. The project gave me enough stability to stop renting. Enough to choose. One morning, I found a house listing that seemed to glow off the page, a 2-story home among pines, glass walls catching the fog, a studio with skylights. It wasn't perfect, but it was possibility. I closed the deal quietly, hung a framed print above the fireplace that read, "You are allowed to take up space," and whispered to myself, "You're not an embarrassment. You're a beginning." That was when I decided it was time to throw a gathering of my own, the kind I had always dreamed of, but never believed I deserved. I called it simply The Gathering. Invitations went out on heavy white linen cards embossed with delicate florals, each envelope hand-addressed in gold ink. There were no digital RSVPs, no family group threads, just a quiet reply card tucked inside that read, "Let's celebrate what we build for ourselves." I mailed them to 35 people who had shaped my journey, friends from design school, clients who had become allies, and mentors who had always seen me as more than the eccentric Harrington child. Not a single card went to anyone in my family. This wasn't revenge. It was peace. The house came alive in preparation. Honey-colored wood floors gleamed under pendant lights that cast golden halos across the glass walls. The garden became the centerpiece, cedar posts strung with lights, a stone walkway scattered with rose petals, and a long oak table beneath a canopy of linen. Every detail carried intention. Candles of bergamot and amber flickered beside floral arrangements grown by a woman from the farmer's market. A chef I admired served roasted vegetables, herbed lamb, and lavender creme brulee on handmade ceramic dishes. A duo played acoustic covers of Norah Jones and soft jazz. It was everything my heart had ever pictured: warm, intentional, unapologetically mine. Guests arrived just before sunset, stepping through the entryway with wide eyes. I heard gasps as they took in the light, the textures, the serenity stitched into every corner. One whispered, "This looks like a spread from El Decor." No one asked if my father had helped or where the rest of my family was. These were people who knew me, not as a footnote to Marcus or Claire, but as Avery. The woman who had been dismissed as too much was standing in her own home, surrounded by people who didn't just tolerate her vision, they celebrated it. As night fell, the table glowed beneath the string lights. Laughter mingled with the strum of guitar. Plates clinked softly, and I realized this was the sound of belonging. Not earned through obedience, but built through authenticity. Later, my friend Zoe pulled me aside near the fire pit. "You realize this is your homecoming, right?" she asked, smiling. I shook my head, whispering, "No, this is the first time I've ever arrived." She snapped a picture of me, then barefoot on the porch. String lights wound around my wrist like bracelets of light. She posted it the next morning with a caption that lit a fuse. She was never lost, just never allowed to lead. My phone lit up with messages. Old classmates, professors, even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years sent words of pride and admiration. You've always been magic, Avery, one wrote. But nestled among the celebrations were names that made my chest tighten. Claire, Marcus, Mom, and then Dad. They hadn't been invited, but they saw everything. They saw the joy that couldn't be faked, the home built without their permission, the applause I had never received from them. The first message came from Mom. I saw the pictures. The house looks expensive. Why didn't you tell us? Claire followed. You really planned a whole event and didn't think we might want to be there? Marcus tagged me in an old family photo. Writing, some people forget their roots. And Dad, his was the heaviest. A screenshot of Zoe's post with one line beneath it. So this is who you are now. No question mark. Just quiet accusation. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because for once, there was nothing to explain. They hadn't asked about my life in over a year. They hadn't called, hadn't wondered how I was building my world. But now that others were clapping, they wanted to claim me again. A few days later, Claire posted a picture from a Harrington family dinner, smiling too tightly at a long table. Her caption read, "Some things money can't buy. Real love, real connection." The comments poured in from aunts and cousins, reinforcing the familiar script, family first, roots that don't break. Zoe screenshotted it all and sent it to me with one word, performative. She was right. It wasn't love driving their posts, it was control slipping away. Then came the email from Dad. The subject read, "Your choices." The message was short, cold. We saw everything. You embarrassed this family. You acted like we didn't exist. You made people think we don't love you. Maybe next time you should think before putting on a show. People are talking. But people weren't talking the way he thought. My inbox was filling with opportunity collaborations, podcast invitations, a request to speak at a Women in Design conference in Vancouver. Strangers were calling my story brave, inspiring. While my family scrambled to rewrite a narrative they had always owned, I was living proof of something they couldn't bend anymore. I didn't need their approval to belong. That evening, I lit candles along the garden wall of my new home, poured a glass of wine, and posted one quiet line to my story. Silence isn't distance. Sometimes it's healing. They all saw it. This time, none of them responded. The silence was theirs now. Then came the message I didn't expect. A simple text from Claire Coffey. Just us. No performance. I stared at Claire's text for a long time. My first instinct was to ignore it. After all, wasn't she the one who laughed when my name card was scribbled on a scrap of paper? The one who brushed off years of dismissal as just Dad's way? But something in the simplicity of her message, no guilt, no performance, just coffee, made me pause. I replied with 3 words. Neutral place, no expectations. We met a week later at a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. The kind of spot that felt like sanctuary. She was already there when I arrived, stirring a cappuccino with shoulders drawn tight. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." I answered. And for a moment, silence sat heavy between us. Claire was the first to break it. "Look, I know we've been awful. I won't defend it. But that party, seeing it online, not being there, it felt like a slap." I raised an eyebrow. "A slap, Claire? I've been excluded my entire life. From jokes, from conversations, from mattering." She flinched at the words but didn't interrupt. I continued. "That night wasn't about revenge. It was about celebrating myself without apology. Maybe for the first time ever, she nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to her coffee. I get that now. Or at least, I'm trying to. The truth is, you always scared us. You never fit into the blueprint. You felt unpredictable. I gave a quiet laugh. You mean I didn't follow the family formula? She smiled faintly. Something like that? Then her expression grew more serious. What would it take for us to try again? I leaned in, my voice steady. You don't get to rewrite me. You don't get to poke fun and call it just teasing. If you want to be in my life, you come in as an equal. No hierarchy, no performance, and absolutely no expectations of access. Claire blinked, then nodded. Okay, she whispered. That's fair. Can I try to do better? I studied her for a long moment before replying. You can try. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't closure, but it was real. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to shrink to be heard. 2 weeks later, an email arrived that felt like fate. The editorial team at a design publication I had admired for years wanted to do a full feature Women Who Build Differently. My first reaction was to say no, to stay quiet, stay small. But then I remembered every dinner table where I'd swallowed myself to make others comfortable. I remembered Dad's email accusing me of embarrassment, Marcus's smug laughter, Mom's indifference. And I thought no more. I said yes. The interview was raw. I spoke honestly about leaving a life where I was treated as the family footnote, about designing spaces not just for beauty, but for breath for people who had been told they were too much or not enough. I didn't name names, but I said one truth clearly. Sometimes the places we leave shape us just as much as the ones we build. When the article came out, it featured a photo of me barefoot in my studio, sunlight pouring through the skylight, paint smudges across my fingertips. The caption read, Avery Harrington, 33. Built her space the way she lives, deliberately and without asking for permission. The piece quietly went viral. Design clients reached out. Old professors sent notes of pride. Even a woman I'd once met at a networking event messaged. Your story helped me walk away from people who never clapped for me. And my family silence. No more passive-aggressive posts. No more guilt-laced emails. Just the quiet realization that they no longer held the center of my orbit. That weekend, I hosted another dinner, smaller this time. Just mentors, friends, Zoe and Claire. She arrived with a simple bouquet of wildflowers and a bottle of wine. As we cleared the table that night, she lingered by my bookshelf, running her fingers across the spines. You know, she said softly, I think this is the first time I've seen you without armor. I smiled. That's because it's the first time I've felt safe without it. Later, after everyone left, I stepped into the garden barefoot. The string lights swayed gently above, the night air cool against my skin. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need validation or headlines. Just the stillness, the candles flickering low, and the quiet knowledge that I hadn't burned bridges. I had simply built a better home. A home where I no longer had to beg for a seat at the table. Because this time, I made the table. The weeks that followed were steady, almost serene. My mornings began with sunlight spilling through the skylight of my studio, sketchbook open, coffee cooling nearby. Work flowed in a way it never had before, not because I was chasing approval, But because I finally understood, I didn't need it. Projects came from clients who valued vision, not pedigree. Emails weren't filtered through the lens of comparison to Marcus or Claire. Each message felt like a door opening instead of another wall. For years, I had believed belonging was something you earned by molding yourself to fit a role. At the Harrington table, I had worn that mold like armor, cutting away every sharp edge of myself to avoid the sting of ridicule. But armor gets heavy, and when I finally set it down, I found that the weight had never been protection. It had been confinement. My family still hovered at the edges of my life. Occasionally, I'd receive a message from Mom, usually clipped and cautious. "Hope you're well." Marcus posted another photo of his children at a piano recital with a caption about tradition, roots, legacy. Claire, to her credit, kept showing up. Not in grand gestures, but in small, tentative ones. A phone call on a Tuesday evening, an invitation to meet at a gallery, sometimes just a text that said, "Thinking of you." She didn't push to see the house or wedge herself into my gatherings. She simply tried, and that was enough for now. Dad never reached out again. His silence was absolute, but it no longer gnawed at me. There was a time when his approval had felt like oxygen, withheld until I gasped. Now, I breathed without it. The Hearth and Form article opened doors I hadn't dared to dream of. I was invited to Vancouver to speak at the Women in Design conference. Standing on that stage, looking out at rows of faces, many of them women who had also been told their work was cute or not serious, I felt the old shame dissolve. I told them the truth for a long time. I believed silence meant weakness. But sometimes silence is a revolution. It's the act of refusing to shrink. It's the space where you can finally hear yourself. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous or chaotic. It was steady, like a heartbeat. One evening, after a long day of sketching, I stepped into the garden barefoot. The air was cool, the scent of lavender lingering from the pots I had placed near the walkway. String lights swayed gently in the breeze. I poured a glass of wine and sat at the oak table I had once dreamed of. And in that stillness, I realized the lesson I had been moving toward all along. We spend so much of our lives begging for seats at tables built by others, waiting for someone to scoot over and make space. But sometimes, the most radical thing we can do is build our own, to invite those who see us, not as projects to be fixed, but as equals to be celebrated. To understand that love isn't measured in applause or titles, but in presence and respect. I hadn't been lost all those years in the Harrington household. I had been planting seeds in silence, waiting for a garden where I could finally bloom. And now, I was standing in it barefoot, unarmored, fully myself. If this story spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. And let me know in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from a place where you were never truly seen? I'd love to hear your story.